Niamh, Fáilte. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone tuning in tonight to Sinn Féin's virtual Fringe meeting to coincide with the British Labour Party conference. My name is Michelle Gildernew. I'm the MP for Fermanagh South Tyrone, Sinn Féin MP for Fermanagh South Tyrone. Obviously, this year's Fringe comes in the midst of this unprecedented pandemic. So unfortunately, we're not able to travel to conference as we usually would to meet with our friends and colleagues within the British Labour Party. However, as you all know, politics never ceases, and the past few weeks have demonstrated to all of us the importance of remaining vigilant to any rollback of progress or infringement of rights. We have two brilliant contributors to the panel this evening. First of all, I'm delighted to welcome Diane Abbott, who I'm sure you'll all be familiar with. Diane was first elected to Westminster in 1987 and has been re-elected by the good people of Hackney North and Stoke Newington at every subsequent election. Diane's been an amazing constituency MP, but also served as Shadow Home Secretary under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, and has been a long-standing friend of Ireland and a supporter of the Irish peace process. Thank you very much for joining us, Diane. We know you're in high demand and we really appreciate your participation with us this evening. Secondly, we have my colleague John Finucane MP. John is the son of the solicitor and human rights activist and campaigner Pat Finucane, who was murdered at his home in February 1989 by a loyalist death squad acting in collusion with British security service personnel. John followed his father's footsteps into the legal profession and in 2019 had an extremely busy year. He was first elected to Belfast City Council. He served as Lord Mayor of Belfast, and I'm sure all of you watching will remember, also became the first nationalist MP for North Belfast, taking that seat from the DUP's leader in Westminster and arch-Brexiteer Nigel Dodds. So we're very proud of John's achievements and all that he has achieved as well. Our discussion this evening will focus around the need to protect the Good Friday Agreement from the disastrous Brexit policy that's being currently pursued by this British government. The past few weeks have seen the Tories brazenly admit that they're prepared to break international law. And this has led to interventions from both the American and European political establishments. We need to remind people, we need them to help us to remind the British government of its obligations under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. And that intervention, the US intervention, was particularly significant at this time because of the whole issue around trade deals with the United States. And I want to mention one person in particular, a very influential woman in Washington over the past 2 decades, is Rita O'Hare, who has made her voice heard on Capitol Hill for over 20 years and has been a huge influence in the process and in with our friends in America now. I know, Diane, you don't have very long to join us, so if we can maybe begin by hearing your thoughts on the current situation and what the British Labour Party and the British Labour movement, how you view all of this unfolding drama in Westminster. So great to see you. Good woman.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's a great pleasure to speak today because I think it's so important to mobilise progressive voices to protect the Good Friday Agreement. As you may have noticed, British government is in chaos under Boris Johnson. We have one of the highest death rates in Europe, and he seems poised to trash the Good Friday Agreement in pursuit of his Brexit obsession. Let me begin by saying that as the daughter of parents who were born in a British colony, I believe in self-determination, the right of people to decide their own system of government and who their rulers will be. And in relation to the Good Friday Agreement, the will of the Irish people was and remains clear. The agreement separate referendum, North and South. In the North, it achieved the backing of 71% of the population, and in the South, the support was even stronger at 94%. But I would remind you all that almost immediately the agreement was made, there were people in Britain who were attacking it. In 2000, when he still worked as a journalist for Rupert Murdoch, Michael Gove wrote a pamphlet, Price of Peace, which likened the Good Friday Agreement to the appeasement of the Nazis, claimed it was a moral stain, a national humiliation, and a capitulation of the IRA. And in case anyone thinks this was just an aberration, Gove has defended these comments as recently as 2016. And of course, no, Michael Gove has become a central member of this government. He's Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Don't ask me exactly what that means. But in practice, people believe that between him and Dominic Cummings, they are really running this government. So there's no love lost in relation to the Good Friday Agreement in terms of key members of the Boris Johnson administration. But because the EU understood the severe difficulties Brexit might cause for Ireland, the EU insisted on and won the withdrawal agreement. But now the British government is threatening to rip up the withdrawal agreement, to the horror actually of even some Tories, because it's an international binding treaty. If the government is allowed to get away with trashing the withdrawal agreement, it will have three different effects on the Good Friday Agreement, all of them negative. First, it will clearly introduce economic damage to Ireland, and the glue of the Good Friday Agreement is rising prosperity. Secondly, it may also generate political turmoil if there's going to be a hard policed custom border in Ireland, as there must be if the withdrawal agreement is ripped up. And finally, the withdrawal agreement is an international treaty, like the Good Friday Agreement. If Tory unionists are going to rip up one treaty because of their own unionists, where will they stop? Thankfully, the Tory unionists are not masters of their own destiny on this matter. They have hugely annoyed the European Union, which means making any deal that's favourable to Britain very difficult. And in what you might call a stroke of political genius, they've also massively annoyed the United States Congress. And it just isn't Joe Biden, he could possibly be the next US president. It's Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats as a whole. And you can't get a trade agreement through without 2/3 of the US Congress voting for it. And the Democrats will surely increase their representation in Congress in November. But there's also Republicans like Peter King, and the clear unified message from the Democrats, from many Republicans, from Nancy Pelosi is no trade deal with the UK if anything is done to undermine the Good Friday Agreement. So, although Boris is heedless and careless, there are grounds for optimism that this latest attack on the Good Friday Agreement can be beaten back. And I want to finish on this point. All of those who support peace in Ireland, all of those who seek to defend the Good Friday Agreement, and all of those who want to ensure it is implemented in full, have friends in the British Labour Party. I and very many others will never walk away from the Good Friday Agreement, and we will work with everyone to defeat this terrible, reckless Tory approach. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thanks a million, Diane. I really appreciate it, and succinct and to the point as ever. John, would you like to make a few remarks now, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, good, Michelle, and good to meet you as well, Diane, albeit through the forum, through the context of Zoom. I was, as Michelle said, I was looking forward to attending my first British Labour Party conference this year. It would have been a year of firsts for me, as Michelle has alluded to at the start. So it's my first year as MP for North Belfast. I was looking forward to it, but I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak at this Fringe event this evening. I think for me, certainly growing up, the first election, the first time that I voted was for the Good Friday Agreement. The very first Secretary of State that I ever met was Mo Mowlam. So I've grown up very much aware that there are people within the British Labour Party like yourself, Diane, who aren't just advocates and supporters of the Good Friday Agreement, but helped to create that environment in which the Good Friday Agreement was possible. And that's not just in the few years leading up to the signing of the agreement. This goes back to people like Dr. McNamara, Tony Benn, and also the hundreds and thousands of socialist activists in England and beyond, and trade unionists, of course, who had tirelessly and consistently advocated for a process on this island that could lead to an eventual settlement. And that's what we saw in the Good Friday Agreement. So it's encouraging, and I thank you for your comments, that there is still that support, because sometimes in this island at the minute you could be forgiven for thinking that there's very little support for the Good Friday Agreement within England. I'm very much aware that politics is more subtle and nuanced than that. But the British Labour Party particularly should be very proud of their legacy in helping to create and get the Good Friday Agreement over the line. As we all know, agreements are one thing, implementation and sustaining that agreement is sometimes where the hard work begins. And I think the context in which we are all active now is really in the middle of an outright attack on the Good Friday Agreement. And I don't say that lightly. But I think since this Tory government have got into power, particularly since the election of 2019, and bolstered by that majority, I think there is a confidence and an arrogance within the Conservative Party in England, whereby they feel that they can do whatever they want, and certainly have Ireland, and particularly the north of Ireland, as collateral damage in what is an England first and Brexit first policy. It's no surprise to people here that the withdrawal agreement was torn up within a matter of months, but by the Tories. It may well anger the EU, it may well anger the United States, and that is encouraging to see, but it's not something that particularly surprised people in this island, and particularly Irish Republicans, who for the past X amount of years have been living with different agreements that have been reneged on by the British government, whether that is in the context of Irish language, whether it's in the context of legacy, whether it's in the context of full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement. We are well used to that. But what we see at the minute is something that is very worrying. I don't think there would be a care in the head of any Tory member if there was a hard border on the island of Ireland. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're mobilised, that we're well connected with, particularly with the Labour Party and beyond in Europe and in America, to make sure that they aren't going to be capable of getting away with that, of doing that, of imposing this on our island. They've already imposed a Brexit that the majority of people here didn't vote for. And they already came to an agreement to ensure that there would be no hard border on the island of Ireland. And I think that whilst we should always make sure that the Good Friday Agreement is fully implemented, I think where the discussion is now going, and it gathers pace on a monthly, weekly, sometimes daily basis, is that our past is very much contained within the Good Friday Agreement, but also our future. And the constitutional future of this island is very much part of mainstream conversation, north and south. And the Good Friday Agreement, of course, has the mechanism for that. It has the mechanism by which a border poll, a unity referendum would be called. And in the midst of these attacks by the Good Friday Agreement, by the Tory government on the Good Friday Agreement, I think more and more people are looking to the future. And they are asking themselves the question, not necessarily in the same way they would have asked it 20, 30, even 5 maybe years ago, but they are asking what type of society do they want to live in? What type of society do they want to work in? Do they want to raise their children in? And I think increasingly people look to England and feel very little in common with that society. And I've talked to those who would constitutionally see themselves traditionally as unionist, but they look to the future and they look to the south and they see a prosperous society, a progressive society, and they want to be part of that conversation as to what exactly a new Ireland would mean. And that, of course, is contained within the Good Friday Agreement. And even in that context as well, Michelle, we know that there are attacks on the mechanism by which a border poll, a unity referendum would be called. We see clear attacks on the 50+1 referendum mechanism. But make no mistake about it, this island is completely changed. And I think, with respect, the election in 2019 was a clear example of that. North Belfast was seismic. It's a seat, as Michelle has pointed to, that has only ever been held by a unionist. I'm the first nationalist, the first Republican to hold that seat. And for the first time in the history of this state, unionism went back to Westminster in a minority. And I don't say that with any sense of joy or any sense of smugness. But I think what it does show is that election after election, there are multiple indicators that the demographics and the vision that people have here for the future is changing. And I think that the time has come where there needs to be a serious conversation with the British Secretary of State, whoever he or she is at any given time, that there does need to be a movement now towards the triggering of that mechanism, but people also need to be very well informed. I'll finish with a point that's been made before many times, but the good thing that I take from Brexit, and there aren't many, is that it is a absolute perfect example of how not to have a referendum when dealing with major matters of constitutional importance. I don't want our referendum here to be fought in the same way that Brexit was. I don't think there's a need for it to be toxic, but it needs to be well informed. It needs to be planned for. And I think that is the stage that we're in now. It's that stage of the Good Friday Agreement that I think we need to be really grasping and moving forward with at this time.
Okay. Gurmiaga, John, thanks a million for that. And again, a very considered contribution to the current situation. I think Dan is still with us, and we've got a number of questions. The first question, I suppose, and this is for both of you, and Dan, I maybe ask you first. This question's from Jack Burns in Edinburgh, who says, do you believe that the intervention from senior US politicians will have any impact on the disastrous course taken by the British government? So Jack's not very optimistic either. Diane, would you like to take that one first?
Well, I hope it will have an impact, only because of self-interest, only because a trade agreement with the United States is really important to Boris. I mean, there's a way in which Boris has turned the UK into a client state of the United States. So if you're a client state, you have to listen to the state which you are a client of. So I hope what people in the US are saying from all parties, I hope that will make a difference.
Okay. John, have you any thoughts on that question?
Yeah.
Do you believe that they'll have any impact on the disastrous course taken by the British government?
I think they already had an impact in the lead up to the election last year. I remember throughout in the build up to the vote in December, there was a journalist, I can't remember exactly what newspaper, possibly the English Telegraph, and he was going through, it was the usual type of interview that you do before the election. And in the context of abstentionism and Brexit, I was citing the example of our party's, very strong footprint in America that has been borne for many, many years. And you mentioned Rita as well in your opening comments. But the success that we had in being able to make sure that the United States remains as a guarantor, there's been a huge personal and political investment in our peace process. And when I talked about how that manifested itself in the comments of Nancy Pelosi, and also Richie Neal. I mean, Richie's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, arguably the most powerful committee in Congress. And the journalist actually accepted that and said that he noted, and a lot of his journalistic colleagues noted, a marked change in Boris's rhetoric and stance whenever he realized that, such powerful positions within American the political spectrum, were completely unequivocal about their stance around the Good Friday Agreement. So I don't think we should ever be complacent about the influence that American politicians will have. There will obviously be a mix leading up to the election in America in November, but that support And make no mistake about it, it's bipartisan support. You know that, Michelle. The bipartisan support that the Good Friday Agreement has enjoyed in America is something that I think has been crucial, not just to achieving that agreement, but making sure that subsequent agreements get over the line as well. So I think the continued support of senior US politicians is very important, and therefore the onus always falls back on us to make sure that they are well informed and that they know what the dangers are when they present.
Absolutely, and you're right, John. It has to be both parties who are briefed and understand. And I know you mentioned Richie Neal, who's been a long-standing friend, but Peter King has been around since as well, and I met him many years ago. So we're very lucky to have friends in both parties. Our next question comes from Keith Finesse on his hospital bed in Margate. Before I would like to say to Keith, get well soon. We hope you make a speedy recovery, and please pass on our regards to Val, who's well known to all of us who've been working in London this long and many's a year. Keith's question is, what can, and again a very pivotal and timely question, what can socialists and trade unionists in England do to speed up a united Ireland beyond the usual petitions and resolutions? So John, I'll take you first on that one, if I may.
Yeah, well, again, get well soon, Keith. I hope you're out from your hospital bed fairly soon. What can people do is brilliant, you know, because people, I think, have a vested interest in issues, but that attitude of what can I do to move this forward, I think, is something that we can't see enough of. Where we are in this phase of unification of Ireland is very important, and I think that there are lots of things that people can be doing. Sinn Féin has a designated page for this. It's sinnfein.ie/Irish Unity, and on that there are a number of texts, there are discussion papers, there are economic papers, and I think bringing this conversation, especially into England, especially into Britain, and making it mainstream is of equal importance, because it's important that society there is well educated and informed as to what exactly unity would mean on this island. There's the economic aspect, there's the political aspect, there's also the aspect of reconciliation. You know, one of the main things about unity is to eradicate once and for all sectarianism on this island. And I think that having these conversations, never underestimating the importance of petitions and resolutions, but making sure that your local political representative, whatever party they may be, asking what they're doing about this, asking about the fact that the multiple triggers and indicators that we are at that tipping point where a majority of people would consider United Ireland, that we've already reached that. We have countless elections that we can point to as examples of that. We have opinion polls, we have, you know, lots of different indicators which show that we are now moving into that phase where a British Secretary of State needs to be serious about this. But also, particularly in England as well, contact the Irish Embassy, because in all of this, the Irish government have a huge role in preparing for a referendum. A referendum would take place both north and south. The Shared Island Unit, as part of the coalition government in the south, is something to be welcomed, but it needs to go further. We need to start talking about dates being set, and we need to make sure that that date is set far enough in advance to make sure that people can be well informed. So this all starts with individual conversations. In Ireland, I talk about the fact that this is something that you talk about with your teammates, your colleagues, your family. And I think that needs to be needs to be replicated in England particularly as well. So Keith, go onto the website, have a look at lots of the different documents, share those, have discussions with those, and bring that forward.
Okay, thank you, John. Diane, have you any thoughts on that?
Well, John gave a really full response. I have nothing to add to that. But I just want to wish Keith, who I've known, like the rest of us, a long time, I hope he gets well soon.
Very good. Thanks, Diane. Our next question comes from Alana Heaney in London, and I want to welcome people, not just in Ireland, but also across Britain and further afield, who have tuned in and joined us on Facebook Live tonight. And we're delighted that you're all here and are listening to the debate. Alana's question is this: why did Tony Blair not implement the Good Friday Agreement in full? He had 3 consecutive terms as PM, to do it. 22 years later, and us Irish people are still waiting. Diane, I might go to you first, if you don't mind.
I'm possibly the wrong person to ask about what goes on in Tony Blair's mind. It's like a lot of things. Tony Blair has taken a lot of credit for the Good Friday Agreement, but I think a lot of people on this call and those of us on this panel know that a lot of work was done by other people in the run-up. I mean, he helped deliver it, but you might say even John Major did more towards Good Friday Agreement than Tony Blair himself. So maybe because he was giving it the final push, he's not as committed as people that were with the process from the beginning. But ask me why Tony Blair said what he said and did what he did, I can't tell you.
Okay, thanks, Diane. That's very forthright. John, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'll bow to Diane's expertise on Tony Blair, I think. But, there are a number of areas of the Good Friday Agreement that haven't been implemented. Language, certainly reconciliation, a Bill of Rights, I think, is arguably one of the most high-profile ones as well. But again, not to diminish that, because they do need to be delivered, and they were in the document for a reason. But not only do we have areas that haven't been implemented, but we also do see those who, I think, subtly and not so subtly, are trying to rewrite the Good Friday Agreement, especially when it comes to what I'd mentioned earlier, which is the triggering mechanism for a referendum, and also what that referendum would look like, particularly the 50+1. So I think we need to work to implement, but also to protect going forward.
Okay, thank you, John. We're getting short on time. I might run the next two questions together, and if you can give a short answer to both. Declan Irwin from Belfast has asked, we have heard from all the devolved regions the threat posed by the Internal Markets Bill to devolution. What does this threat look like practically? And if just a thought on the referendum, the border poll, if you have a thought on when you believe this should be called. So John, I'll take you, and then Diane, if that's okay.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, in relation to the referendum, I think our position is that it needs to be within 5 years. There needs to be preparation for this. There is quite clear, which I find politically perverse and intellectually bankrupt, that Micheál Martin, our Taoiseach from a party of Fianna Fáil, seems to be against such a referendum. I think his party, you can see that even today and in recent days, holds a different view. But there is a big onus on the Irish government to play their part in making sure that what will happen happens in a way that is conducive to informed and reasoned debate, because people need to be very clear. I don't really mind what way people vote. I obviously want them to vote for this, but what I do care about is that vote has to be well informed. People need to know clearly what they're voting for and what they're voting against. And it's not a referendum that I want to win just by waving a flag in somebody's face. And that's why the Irish government are so crucial to making sure that the preparation stage of this goes to a different level. In relation to the Internal Markets Bill, again, I suppose I referenced this in my opening comments. This is something that presents a clear danger to the Good Friday Agreement. It has the potential to lead to a hard border in Ireland. We have had this conversation many times over about why that is not a good thing. We have all referenced this in our comments this evening, and it has been talked about ad nauseum, I'm sure, since 2016. But yet the Tory government seem intent on being reckless with our Good Friday Agreement if it gets them over the line for what they want to do in an English first policy. It tears up international law. It, I think, destroys what little credibility this government has on the international stage with regard to tearing up agreements. So it does pose a clear threat, and those are I suppose, the outworkings of that.
Okay, thank you, Diane.
Well, we've heard in Parliament from Scottish National Party who feel very strongly about this piece of legislation and the threat it is to them and the threat it is to the autonomy of the Scottish Parliament. The sad thing is that Boris Johnson doesn't appear to care. And Tory after Tory has said publicly that we can't be in a position of tearing up international agreements. But Boris Johnson seems to think he can plough on. And the understanding is that he may get it through the Commons, but he can't get it through the law. Too many Tory peers who are against it. So I think people know what the threat is. Even people in the Tory party understand what the threat is. And I think it is still possible to block this legislation.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Look, I know we've had to run through a lot in a very short space of time. Dan, thank you for giving up your time on a Sunday evening. We want everybody who's tuned in, all of your questions. It's been amazing. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to them all. I want to thank everybody who had attributed a question to, also to Paul Cahill from Coventry, who had asked the last question there. We really genuinely hope everyone is taking care of themselves and following the public health guidelines. We know we're in a very, very difficult situation, and Brexit was difficult enough without COVID on top of it. So please keep safe, everybody. For anyone watching who's based in Britain and one who's interested in joining the campaign for United Ireland, please keep in touch and email londonoffice@sinnfein.ie to be added to our mailing list. We'd love to have you, and Joe's great at keeping everybody abreast of things. So again, Dan, I want to thank you and your party. I mean, I've long had great relations with people within the British Labour Party. You've been very good to me over the years, especially the years when I worked in London. So thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it deeply. You and your colleagues and all the people who have given us such graw for Ireland and who really genuinely want us to see the achievement of unity. So Gurmila Mila Malgav, everybody for tuning in, Dan and John for participating. Ihoai.